I want to take you back to Christmas 2021. It's my apartment in New York, and our daughter is asking, can we have a bit more cake? Can we have some more sweet things? And we say, sorry, no, we've had too much cake recently, we've had too much dessert, we can't. And she's disappointed, and she goes out to another room, comes back 10 minutes later and finds the grown-ups eating cake out the fridge. And she's outraged. And then almost instantly she says, you're like the Prime Minister saying people couldn't have a party when he was having parties himself. And this was in 2021. There was a big scandal, certainly in the UK media, about Boris Johnson, who was the Prime Minister, whether he'd had a party or two or three at Downing Street in COVID lockdown. And as it turned out, he had, and there were quite a few others. But it was the big scandal indeed. It was the hypocrisy, the perceived hypocrisy that brought him down as leader of the UK about 6 months later. At the time, it was generally thought this was the thing that did for him. But it's not over as an issue. This hypocrisy, the perceived hypocrisy, also really damaged trust. Trust in the government, which has had a longer afterlife. Just the other month, I was reading a newspaper article from a UK newspaper where it was talking about how people, the general public, thought that maybe we didn't have to pay as much attention to climate change these days. And I was just reading through this and came across this comment from Thomas, which caught my eye. It says, it's not a top priority. What annoys me is that it's a bit like COVID, where the government said, this is what you've got to do, and they sort of did their own thing. So even with climate change, they're happy to go on their private jets and get where they need to be. It's a little bit hypocritical. This came out of nowhere. The power of hypocrisy, and this particular case of hypocrisy to influence us, is really, really strong. When I read this, I had an initial reaction which was kind of split. On the one hand, I thought, Thomas, I get it. I get the anger. There's something very intuitive. I know what you mean. But then my other thought was, but this is also really weird. It's a weird way to think, because if you think an issue is important, the fact that someone else is maybe being hypocritical shouldn't really change that in some ways. When you get into it, you think, well, maybe actually what's going on is people think that the government doing slightly inconsistent things is a signal they don't really care, or maybe it's a sign that other people won't do something if I do it, sorry, and I don't want to be caught out. And maybe also, maybe I don't want to do this thing at all, and pointing out someone else's hypocrisy is a way of me feeling better about myself. We want to really punish hypocrites. When we see it, we really dislike it. In fact, surprising thing may be that we dislike hypocrites even more than liars, okay? Suppose you hear about somebody who says that they never download music illegally, and then you find out they've been downloading music illegally, okay? Compare that to somebody who says, downloading music illegally is wrong, it's morally wrong. They don't actually say anything about what they do. And then they're found to be downloading music illegally. We actually dislike that person more. The reason is that we think that condemnation is a stronger signal that you wouldn't do something yourself than actually saying you don't do it. It's how we interpret it that way. And so what happens is, when people are doing this, hypocrites are sending a stronger signal, a stronger claim to status, a stronger signal of consistency, that when we find out it's false, we see that as an unfair exchange. They've got something they didn't deserve, and it infuriates us. It's not just individuals, it's also companies. Consider a company that is found to be polluting a lake with toxic waste. If people thought that they had previously been making hypocritical and insincere commitments about the environment. They want more jail time for executives and greater damages. The act is the same, of course, but it's the layer on top that makes us really angry, as the study shows. That's the infuriating part. And you can see that one thing we're doing there is trying to sort of punish people who are violating trust in general. But that's not really the whole explanation, because the other thing is that we like taking down hypocrites. It's not just about high-minded principles. We enjoy it. We get schadenfreude, the joy in others' misfortune, specifically from hypocrisy. So suppose you hear about a student who is very kind of moralizing and says, you know, it really gets me annoyed when people are cheating, plagiarizing, and we try and crack down on that and punish them. Okay, so you hear about this student, you know, maybe they're kind of puffed up, and it would be nice to see them taken down in various ways. Well, suppose they're found to do something that's immoral, like stealing, say stealing from the chemistry lab. The truth is, when we find out about this, we don't actually enjoy it that much. So this on the right-hand side is a measure of schadenfreude that people feel in this scenario. And I've put the yellow arrow in the condition where the student is stealing something that's not related to their moralizing. Okay, so it's not just like taking down someone who's sure of themselves. It completely changes if the student is found to be cheating or plagiarizing, the exact thing that they were condemning others for. Then the schadenfreude shoots up, okay? We feel really good about it. There's something about the symmetry here, the poetic justice, that we find satisfying. We hate hypocrisy, we see it everywhere, and yet there's some kind of hypocrisy we kind of like. That's the truth. You may not have to reflect that much to think about it. Here are three kinds of hypocrites we kind of like. One, the virtuous hypocrite. So it's a picture of one of the founders of the Ashley Madison website, which was created to enable people to have extramarital affairs. This guy actually wrote a book called Cheaters Prosper. He promoted infidelity as a really good thing. In this study, people were told that he himself was actually personally faithful to his wife. So he didn't cheat. Now, when you're told that, people do think that the person is a hypocrite. But people also thought he was much more praiseworthy and virtuous than when they thought he also practiced what he preached. Now, you may think that's a really contrived example, but it is true that you may strategically conceal your virtues as well, because hypocrisy is not just about morality. It's about a claim to status of various kinds. You're making a false claim to status. So consider someone who gives the impression of being a maverick, a free thinker, and then is actually deeply conventional. A teenager who says they're against authority, doesn't care about the future, and then goes home and does their homework in private. There's kind of hypocrisy which we think is the right thing to do, even though we're not practicing what we preach. The second kind of okay hypocrite is a relatable hypocrite. And this is where someone's flaws and imperfection make us like them more, make them more effective, in fact. So there's a study that shows that individuals who are overweight and obese will actually avoid doctors who are very fitness focused and actually sort of follow through on their own advice about diet and healthy eating, because they feel they're going to get judged and looked down on. And they'd actually rather go somewhere else, maybe to someone who's less consistent, but then they won't feel like they're being judged so much. And this is a tendency called do-gooder derogation, and you can see it quite a bit in the climate space. So weirdly, or not weirdly, someone who is ultra-sustainable, does all the things that you're meant to do around not flying, not eating meat, and so on, they're actually less convincing in terms of helping you do climate sustainable stuff than someone who makes some compromises and does, tries to do their best, but falls short. Sure, the hypocrites who don't practice what they preach are the least effective, but we actually don't like the super consistent people as well, because also they make us feel bad. And then finally, the reasonable hypocrite. And this is where we acknowledge that life involves trade-offs between multiple competing values. And we're just going to have to, part of being human is making a choice between them. And yeah, that's being inconsistent. So consider someone who maybe fairly recently became an ardent vegetarian. They go and see their aged grandmother who's made her treasured meat stew. She's always made it. Maybe she doesn't have that long to live. If he's not a hypocrite, he's going to go, no, I don't eat meat anymore. It's wrong. It's morally wrong. Get it away from me. Do we think that's the right thing to do? Instead, you should probably pick at the vegetables and say it's wonderful. And in fact, if you do that, only 30% of people will think you're a hypocrite, mainly because they'll think you're doing the right thing. You've got the other kind of values coming in, the values of not harming or hurting your close relatives against your other values of being principled. We sometimes have to make a trade-off, and we sometimes think it's the right thing to do.